Okay, guys, this is the final one that I'm making of these three screen captures. So things that you have to think about in a poem. Speaker, who is speaking? Now, it seems obvious, oh, it's the poet. No, not always. It can be an out-and-out persona poem. For example, Sylvia Plath once wrote a poem from the point of view of a mirror. Or it could be a poem from the point of view of another person or people. As well as an object or an animal. Or it could be a persona poem, even if it seems to be from the point of view of the poet, in which the poet is playing up certain characteristics of theirs for the poem itself. Tone, mood. What is the tone of the speaker? What mood does the tone provoke in the audience? Audience. Who is the audience? Who is the poem aimed at? Other poets? T.S. Eliot often did this, right? I mean, or Ezra Pound was even worse. I'm not going to say worse, but I just did, I guess. You couldn't really read them, especially Ezra Pound, but often Eliot as well, without, especially in The Wasteland, without understanding, without having read a ton of other poets, especially romantic and modernist poets. Well, I mean, everything actually. All of the traditions up till that date. There's a lot of different eras of and styles within those eras of poetry and English language poetry, as well as different eras and styles and forms in other languages. So you had to kind of know a lot to. He did a lot of name dropping, otherwise known as literary allusions, alluding to other poets. So. However, for example, We Real Cool, Gwendolyn Brooke, the audience there was regular people, and especially young people, in those Harlem neighborhoods that she was talking to, right? Is it specifically to a specific race? Or is it more pointed at, or does it like resonate more with people of that race? For example, We Real Cool was directed towards people in Harlem, particularly kids, and particularly African American kids, whereas the poem we can look at right now, although it's not directed specifically to white people, it's about disaffected people in the Midwest after many jobs were lost, many farm jobs were lost to industry and to people and to big agriculture and people having to migrate to the cities and so on. So what part does that play in it? Is it men or women? Same thing. Who is it aimed at and who is it for? These could be different, right? It could be taking aim at one particular audience and for another. Like condemning one group while being for another. Like, for example, Marge Piercy's Barbie doll was for women, but kind of condemning a male society or male dominant society that had all these expectations of female beauty and valuability based on that. Value based on that. Okay, and imagery, sensory language. The senses, visual descriptions, auditory descriptions, taste, touch, smells, what does it evoke? Figurative language, simile and metaphor, symbolism. What are the symbols symbolic of and how are they tied together, right? We talked about how simile is like or as, her smile is like the sun, her smile is the sun, the man is like a mountain, the man is a mountain. Forgive me if I sound a bit tired, I am a little tired at this point. Okay, so we're talking about James Wright. Okay. Lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. Always a very long title. Always do look at titles, right? Because people often skip right over this title and don't think about its meaning in the poem. So let's just go ahead and read this first. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly, asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life. Okay, so this seems to be, I'm sorry for all these ads, because you were very annoying. This seems to be like come out of nowhere. Wow, what a twist ending, right? Because it seems such a peaceful poem. And it does seem, on the surface, to be peaceful. He's describing lying in a hammock. Let's take a look at some of the symbols and imagery in here, okay? Bronze butterfly. It's kind of hard and metallic. He's sort of describing late afternoon or setting sun and the way it casts these colors, but doesn't give a feeling of lightness, right? And it's asleep. It's not stirring. Black trunk. Both the hard k sounds there, k and then also the imagery there of the black trunk, green shadow here, and a shadow. Ravine, which is a big, sort of trench in the earth. Empty house. Oh, this is driving me nuts. Sorry. Empty house. Okay, so we know that the house that he's at is empty. Distances of the afternoon. This is full of all kinds of nostalgia, right? Cowbells follow one another, so there are cows, or at least there were cows. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. He knows that these are last year's horses. Not because it's his farm. Look at the title. It's William Duffy's farm. Who is William Duffy to him? We don't know, but he's been there before last year, and he knows that these are last year's horses, and they're not there anymore. And they're shining golden in the late afternoon. Lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over looking for home. So this is not a dove. This is not some bird, a symbol of peace. It's a chicken hawk, which is a bird of prey. And it's looking for home, which, again, there's that sense of longing. I have wasted my life there at the end. Now, if you think about all of the clues in this poem, which you could think of as like foreshadowing, right, of this here, when you notice those, it makes more sense. But if you don't notice those, then it seems to come out of nowhere, right? Because it seems relaxing, describing the scene, this kind of bucolic scene that's so peaceful. And lying in a hammock and so on, right? But when you start to look at the imagery I wouldn't say is necessary. I mean, some of it's just plain imagery, but some of it's symbolic, like the shadow could be symbolic of the sort of shadow over the speaker. Distances of the afternoon are how distant he is from the memory of this is like a wistful or nostalgic memory, which is not true happiness. Distance he is from the life and happiness that this represents, sort of after image of looking for home here, symbolizes this speaker's yearning for home. So there's definitely things that you could say are symbolic here, right? And then just the imagery itself seems to, like an example of kind of literary irony in that it's ironic considering the peaceful seeming theme of the poem or voice of the speaker. So again, in light of that, this just makes more sense if you think about that. Okay, the speaker really matters in this poem. First of all, who is it for? Is it for people who know about, is it for like people who have been there? Is it for people who are vagabonds, are kind of drifters that take farm work here and there where they can get it, who are out of work and are luckless? Is it for fellow poets in the city? Who is the audience? That kind of matters. Who is the speaker? Is the speaker the poet? If the speaker is the poet, then perhaps what he's saying is that by moving to the city and, rubbing shoulders with the literati and not being around his homeland, he has wasted his life instead of being there on the farm as he was supposed to be. And now, look, he's returned and it's empty. He's lost. It's too late. Or is the speaker a drifter? Is it a persona poem from the point of view of a drifter who is out of work and has wasted his life because he's never gotten his own farm, because he never managed to make it in time? He was always arriving too late. He was always working someone else's farm, and now it's gone empty and the work's dried up and his life's been wasted. Does he feel that he's wasted his time literally by lying in the hammock all day rather than actually doing something, right? Although it seems to be talking about something else. There's a definite nostalgia and wistfulness that's happening here with describing something that's past, a sort of glorious age that's past. And again, the symbolism of the late afternoon darkening into the evening and coming on. Is this all talking about an older man looking back on the glory of his youth, and all that's left of it is the waste that now seems to blaze up golden when he looks back over it? Is that, again, sort of symbolic and what would be called an extended metaphor of an older man looking back over his life, using this metaphor of the farm? So what you think the speaker is saying and who you think the speaker is and who he's saying it to are very, very important here. I hope that you can kind of see that. And the imagery and the symbolism of that imagery is going to make a big difference. I want you to also notice, there's some sounds, the cowbell in here. You can almost feel the wind blowing. So there's some other, it's not just visual imagery, there's also sound imagery and tangible, tactile imagery. So think about that when reading something. If you're like, for example, Fern Hill, full of all different kinds of sensory imagery and images. Okay, so going back to this document here, talking about register, this also has to do with figuring out who the speaker is and who they're speaking to. Is it formal or informal is what register mean? Does it sound like a friend talking to you or conversational, like in We Real Cool, or does it sound more like heightened language with a rich vocabulary that is out of the ordinary or sounds more formal, as in Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night? It sounds very oratorical as well as sort of rhetorical. He's addressing it to on high, Is there a mix in the gift? If Leung leaves the gift, there is a mix. And if so, why? And to what effect? Why is the formal language suddenly interjected into the casual language or vice versa? So you want to think about that, okay? Figurative language, the metaphors and similes, the symbols that are found within the imagery, the sensory language, and what they mean. Think of symbolism as as a metaphor that is found within imagery. Yes, speaker is very important. Tone, mood. This is definitely a melancholy, and I'd say nostalgic, with some melancholy for sure, and wistful kind of tone that evokes a melancholy. It evokes at first a peaceful kind of mood, but with a strange melancholy that makes sense at the end of the poem, at least for me. Some people feel immediately totally happy reading it until they get to the end and feel sort of sucker punched, but I always have gotten that sense of melancholy from the first reading. So I hope that was helpful for describing some different poetic devices. And I'm going to sign off now.